Aaron Katersky has just made his way outside the courthouse into a microphone. And Aaron, your notes were extraordinarily helpful here. As Dan and I were just talking about, quite something to hear that Nicolas Maduro will likely claim that there are issues, legal issues, about his military abduction. And he declared in that courtroom through his attorney that he remains the head of a sovereign state.
He did, David. He said, I am the president. I am still the president of the Republic of Venezuela. His wife, Cilia Flores, likewise said that she is the first lady of the Republic of Venezuela. And defense attorney Barry Pollock signaled that he will challenge the circumstances of Maduro's capture by the U.S. military. This is a tactic that Manuel Noriega tried when he was found to have surrendered to U.S. forces in Panama back in 1990. It did not work in the U.S. courts then. It may not work now, but he will certainly try. But the U.S. just doesn't recognize Maduro as a legitimate president. He certainly does. And as he stood before Judge Alvin Hellerstein a short while ago, he declared himself, I am Nicolas Maduro. I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am the president of Venezuela.
It did seem from the notes that you shared with us from inside the courtroom, Aaron, that the judge signaled fairly early on here that there would not be time for speeches, that will come in due time through their defense, that he was simply asking for them to confirm who they are, that they understand the charges against them, and ask them their plea. That both when Nicolas Maduro spoke and when Cilia Flores spoke, the judge interjecting essentially in so many words saying this is not the time and place for that.
Exactly right, David. The judge did not want this to turn into any kind of a spectacle, and he wanted to keep this as ordinary as is possible, despite the extraordinary circumstances of how Nicolas Maduro got here. He is now being treated like every other criminal defendant in the dock here at Manhattan Federal Court. David, as the judge asked Maduro to affirm, he appeared to be prepared to go off on a lengthy speech declaring himself the rightful president of Venezuela, challenging why he was even here in the first place, and the judge just was not going to let him do it, at least at this stage. He said he would entertain motions in the future, and Maduro does not have to be back in court until March 17th. In the meantime, he is going to be detained at MDC-Brooklyn, the decrepit federal jail where every other defendant awaiting trial here at Manhattan Federal Court is held. David, the defense said they would not challenge Maduro's detention at this point, although the judge said they have the opportunity to try and do that in the future.
Describe for me, if you will, Aaron, the scene inside that courtroom. They were both brought in. I know they were both shackled, brought to their chairs, seated not far from one another. Was there any sort of communication, even a glance between Nicolas Maduro and his wife sitting not far from him in that courtroom? How did this play out?
It did not appear that Maduro and his wife looked at one another, but they were seated with just a lawyer between them. And at one point, when the judge informed them of their right to be in contact with consular services, with someone from the Venezuelan consulate here in New York, Maduro answered for both of them and said, we would like to take advantage of those consular services. But otherwise, it did not appear that Maduro and his wife interacted at all. Maduro was brought in first wearing beige pants, a black smock over an orange T-shirt, and orange jail slippers. He was escorted to a chair that the U.S. Marshals had flipped over to inspect. We've seen that before for high-profile defendants. They flipped over all the chairs at the defense table before Maduro was seated. His wife was then brought in next, wearing a very similar outfit, beige pants, black smock, orange T-shirt, took her place, kept her arms folded on the table, whereas Maduro himself took notes almost through the entire proceeding, and at the very end, he asked the judge for permission to make a request that he keep those notes, and the judge said that he could.
Aaron, as all of this was playing out, Nicolas Maduro's son, who is also under indictment, though he remains in Venezuela, speaking to the National Assembly there, where he's been a lawmaker for about 4 years now, since 2021. And in a message to his father in front of the Venezuelan people, he said, "Dad, you created a strong family. The nation is in good hands while we await your return. I love you." That was the message from his son. There's the picture of the National Assembly there in Venezuela. Certainly, from the standpoint of the words that he used, somewhat hopeful that he'll see his father one day soon in Venezuela. But given the proceeding here today in Lower Manhattan, a stark reminder that is unlikely to happen. And in fact, the earliest we might see these trials begin could be some time from now, Aaron.
Oh, it could be months, if not a year or longer, David, before Nicolas Maduro ever stands trial on this 4-count indictment to which he, in rather dramatic fashion, pleaded not guilty. Rather than just say not guilty, he attempted something of a soliloquy saying, "I am innocent, I am not guilty, I am a decent man, I am still president of my country," before the judge cut him off and simply said a plea of not guilty would be entered on his behalf. And Nicolas Maduro is going nowhere but back to jail in Brooklyn. He arrived here under heavy guard, David. There is still metal barricades and fencing stretching the length of the courthouse and beyond as protesters have come here to the courthouse, some even cheering when Maduro, it was realized, had pleaded not guilty to those charges. Half the protesters are against what the United States military did, and other protesters are here saying this was the right thing to do, and the NYPD is keeping both groups apart.
Our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who was inside that courtroom today. We do have our chopper up in the air from WABC here in New York over the facility, should we see any of the movements here of Nicolas Maduro. There you can see the scene. We're not expected to see him like we did this morning around 8 a.m. and that carefully planned trip from Brooklyn, the detention center where he's being held, to Manhattan to get him to this federal courthouse, he and Cilia Flores, the First Lady of Venezuela. But our chopper up in the air, and as soon as we see any movement here, we'll bring it to you. But in the meantime, I just want to get to the bottom line here, the breaking news this afternoon. Not only the U.S. watching this, but the world. Nicolas Maduro, the ousted Venezuelan president in that U.S. military operation over the weekend, now declaring in federal court in Manhattan, quote, "I am innocent, I am not guilty, I'm a decent man, I am still president of my country." His attorney in that courtroom signaling which direction they may go now, questioning the legality they believe, of this U.S. military operation. Cilia Flores then asked if she, in fact, is Cilia Flores. She said, "I am the First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela." The judge interjecting, saying, "The purpose today is to simply ask you who you are." He explained to her her rights. She said, "Yes, I understand them." And she went on to declare her innocence in federal court here in the U.S. as well. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. We're going to return to local programming. If there are any major developments, I'll be back on the air with the team. But we'll definitely be back with the entire team for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. I'll see you then.